Is there a scenario where Marvel and DC could merge? Which, in effect, would mean Time Warner, AT&T, would sell DC to Disney. It's not going to go the other direction. Is that viable? Well, it's not. And there's a million, well, probably put it more rightly, there's several billion reasons why not. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, this is Perch. As for whatever reason, it just takes a couple of comments. A while back, Ethan Van Sciver said on a channel that the 5G initiative was kind of the last ditch effort for basically DC to prove itself. And if not, then Warner Brothers would shut them down. And that comment led to a lot of DC Comics just getting shut down, videos and articles and other things. This is all surrounding when Dan Didio was fired. But very quickly, people hopped to the next topic, or the likely chain, which is, could Disney basically buy DC? Could things merge? Well, that's an extremely unlikely scenario, but let's pause for a moment and say, as a comic book fan, there's a lot of people who would like that to happen and an equal number of people who would hate for that to happen. Many people, if you grew up with comics, you've seen the amalgam crossovers, and you'd kind of really like to see a Batman, Spider-Man crossover, and just various. There's lots of opportunities if you become a comic fan where you want to see these characters interact. And there's always been a pretty big wall that occasionally comes down, but it hasn't come down for quite some time, between the two companies. And so the idea of a dream crossover has always been there. But it's more unlikely now than ever for that to happen. And the reasons are money. Essentially, the Marvel universe is no longer this kind of standalone, simple comic book land. It's got a huge media empire behind it. Licensing was always strong for Spider-Man and some of these other characters, but now when you've got, multi-billion-dollar movies coming out the gate, and while some have speculated that Phase 4, Phase 5 of the MCU will not do as well, because you're missing Chris Evans, you're missing Robert Downey Jr., you've taken some big characters off the board. They also forget that there was just a pretty massive acquisition of Fox properties where the X-Men are now in play. The X-Men have never been hotter in the comic book world. Stories are being pumped out of there just that can be translated into big movies for Disney. That's where their head's at. Their head is at exploring that whole other universe of characters, the Fantastic Four, all the cosmic stuff. There's another 20 years worth of material for movies. And it's a much better likelihood that the whole interest in comic book films in general will collapse long before Disney has played with the toys they now own. So if you think about, what would be the benefit to Marvel to owning this other land? Well, as a crossover, very little from a medium price. They're not going to make Captain Marvel meet Superman. It's not a movie people necessarily want. It's a property that would not make sense and would kind of destroy a lot of the planning that's been going on. It's unlikely, and when I say unlikely, it's probably the most impossible thing I can think of. If Disney suddenly wound up with all of the DC properties, they might start a DC movie universe, but they would keep it separate. They would not merge the two together, even if fans would clamor for it. There's just too much money to be made with them apart. You start to cannibalize things if you smush them together. So then becomes the question, would Marvel even buy DC? Like, what would that look like? Well, from a property standpoint, as I just mentioned, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But from another standpoint, there's a problem here, and that is Bob Iger has just left the company. He's going to be with Marvel with Disney now as a chairman through 2021. But they've spent so much money. I mean, Disney has put so much dollars into the entertainment side of the world. They're not going to run off and make another acquisition. It's certainly not this scale. DC properties would not come cheap. You could say, well, the comics aren't doing very well. Yeah, but they'd have to be buying the licensing. They'd have to be buying things like Superman, Batman. Those properties are still churning out billion-dollar movies themselves. You can point to Birds of Prey being a bomb. It still made money, but more importantly, Joker made $1 billion. Wonder Woman is expected to come close to or make $1 billion. There's still a lot of money in this pipeline. Time Warner is not going to give that up cheap, or frankly would not give that up at all, because here's the other big reason why a merger and any kind of sale is impossible. Right now, AT&T bought Time Warner pretty much for one huge purpose, and that's to compete with the Netflix, Amazons, and Disneys of the world that have streaming entertainment services, and everybody believes that's where the dollars are going. Terrestrial cable is gone, and this is the future. AT&T needs to have a stake in that future. They believe it's critical. There's still a lot of plans going on the Comcast side of the world. They do not partner. It's AT&T competes now, they firmly believe, with Disney and with Amazon. They're competing for time, competing with eyeballs. AT&T, Time Warner, has an entertainment division. They are not friends with these other companies. Right now, if you look at the properties that Time Warner owns as part of this deal, you come up with CNN, you come up with PBS, TNT, Boomerang, the WB, the Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, True TV, and of course, DC. And there's other little properties in there. But did you notice a common thread in all of those companies? It's that there's very little original content in there. There's many of these entities that they bought, they either license or they do repeat programming or other things. Things like TBS and TNT, while they have their own shows, it's minimal compared to a lot of their licensing. It would be really unfair to call them the IDW of television, but it's not a completely unfair comparison either, because they're not known as an original content maker. And while many of these companies are trying, generally what they try is reality TV, cheaper shows, and the market share that they own reflects that. Now, once again, I don't want to throw shade, because there are some great shows on all these channels, and many of these stations have produced good content that make money, but not in mass. So now it becomes another problem. If you look at these properties, the one that has a huge licensing lock, that has characters that everybody knows and loves, it's DC. So basically, the crown jewel of their properties, the ones that provide them a lot of different units and things to play with, it's DC. If they were to get rid of that, they would be handing off a huge volume of their original IP content that they do believe they can shape and take places to a competitor. And that's not going to happen. All in all, is it impossible that Time Warner and AT&T will shut down or sell off DC? It's possible. Anything is possible, always. But I'll give you one more thing to consider, and there will be a complete video about this later. The marketing budget for Watchmen, the HBO series, it exceeded the cost of producing 5 or 6 comics for DC by itself, and then some. The numbers will actually shock you. So as I do that video later, I'm going to put the numbers up on the screen. You'll see. If you think about comics as a loss leader or a marketing leader, that's maybe not the wrong way to think about it, even if it is a little depressing. As a comic fan, I'd love to see these properties interact together, but chances are that's just not going to happen anytime soon. There's too many competitive reasons, billions of dollars of competitive reasons why that won't happen. But do you have a different view? I'd love to hear about it. Leave a comment below. Like, subscribe if you're inclined. Would love to have you. Follow me on Twitter @ComicPerch and send some questions there. But most importantly, thanks for listening.